I want to go to San Francisco, that bastion of conservatism.
Why, Chris? Why would you want to go there?
I don't think I'd be given a visa to enter the city. But San Francisco in the last week came out with a pretty outrageous, in my view, statement from the city council. It was offered in advance by a supervisor, District 2 Supervisor Catherine Stefani. And we've got some of the language of the San Francisco pronouncement against the NRA, where they say that the city and county of San Francisco should take every reasonable step to assess the financial and contractual relationships of our vendors and contractors with respect to domestic terrorist organizations. And that's framed with calling the National Rifle Association domestic terrorists. So there's the financial leverage that we touched on as we went out of the last segment of our show. This is an effort to strong-arm businesses, banks, other retail entities into not cooperating with, being friendly towards, in any way, gun ownership. The council goes on from there and talks about how they encourage all of the jurisdictions, including other cities, states, and federal government, to adopt similar positions. Here's a city council saying that the National Rifle Association, one of the oldest, largest organizations, citizens, individual rights organizations in the country, that organization, and I guess by inference, NRA members, are domestic terrorists. How does the city council get away with that?
Well, I don't know if they do, because they've been sued by the National Rifle Association for that statement, as well as, again, the efforts to try to block businesses from working with the NRA. You know, it's one thing to see this type of language on social media. I've seen the hashtag NRA is a terrorist organization, and you'll find, left-leaning activists that'll use that. It's another thing, though, to see, an actual governmental body make a declaration that you see on social media, right? And as you say, if they're declaring the NRA to be a domestic terror organization, that means that the millions of NRA members must be domestic terrorists.
Correct.
And that is absolutely outrageous. To call the millions of men and women, who are moms and dads, who are teachers, police officers, firefighters, soldiers, veterans, Medal of Honor recipients, to call them domestic terrorists. Look, it'd be nice to be able to just excuse this as grandstanding on the part of politicians, but it really has to be dealt with, because I think this is a really ugly chapter in the culture wars that the San Francisco supervisors have opened up.
This Catherine Stefani, the supervisor, she was quoted as saying that the NRA had it coming. What does that tell you about sort of the disposition, her mindset, it is probably one of the most outrageous acts by a municipal body against a group of citizens. They make outrageous claims. In one part, they say that the NRA promotes extremist positions, they undermine the general welfare, and that they have incited gun owners to acts of violence. I mean, first of all, it's a lie. I mean, those are multiple lies. And yet you have an entire city council come out and offer this as their position and encourage other municipalities to do so. Here's my concern. Who else is going to jump on the bandwagon?
Well, the state of New Jersey has jumped on the bandwagon. And this week, the New York Times is reporting the state of New Jersey will no longer do business with gun manufacturers who don't abide by the standards New Jersey wants them to, which are far and away beyond what federal law already requires for background checks, for safety, for manufacturing. And so this is, I think, an ugly chapter, as you said, in the culture wars, when you start to use state power and state-sponsored power in pursuit of advocacy, and the kind of advocacy that strips people of their constitutional rights, not just your Second Amendment rights, but your First Amendment rights as well. And we're seeing this not only at the state level, but at the corporate level, which we talked about a little bit, but banks like Citi and Bank of America no longer making lines of credit out to gun manufacturers or people that want to own firearms. I mean, this is now, the way people interact with society is now being restricted simply because someone wants to exercise their Second Amendment rights. This is, I think we are in an uncharted territory when you see this kind of advocacy at this kind of compelling of people's
Absolutely. And speaking of that executive order in New Jersey, another component of that executive order actually directs the state treasurer to investigate whether or not financial institutions have established codes of conduct for businesses within the firearms industry that they may provide financing for. Now, it doesn't direct the state to divest or to stop doing business with these companies, but clearly that's the next step. And so you're right. They are willing to use, if they can't use the legislature, if they can't use Congress, if they can't use the judiciary, can't use the regulatory agencies, then they'll go and they'll try to use private enterprise. And they'll try to bully private enterprise into adopting practices that amount to a limitation or an elimination of our constitutional rights.
I mean, this is not new. I mean, during the Obama administration, you had Operation Choke Point, which went and essentially put pressure on financial institutions to make it so that people who were selling guns or whatever found that they couldn't run credit cards. That they had troubled banks or others that they had financial relationships with for decades were being pressured by the federal government into breaking those relationships, making it costly or difficult for them to even exist. So, I mean, I guess one question I have is if they define all the members as being domestic terrorists, does that mean they get to arrest them? I mean, they're not even saying that they're thinking about it. They're declaring that they actually are domestic terrorists. But this notion about inciting violence, I don't know, partly because the media people have this image that guns are only used to do bad things. We rarely hear about defensive gun uses. At our website at crimeresearch.org, I've literally dozens of cases over the last few years where mass public shootings have been stopped by people with concealed carry permits, but you would never hear stories about them on the national news.
It is very one-sided reporting. I mean, any number of different Second Amendment or gun owner type, either whether it's a website or a magazine or any number of publications out there, will list on a monthly or weekly basis all sorts of local news articles about somebody going into a 7-Eleven and trying to rob the place, and a law-abiding, gun-carrying citizen interdicting or stopping or saving someone's life. And those multiple instances, in my view at least, far outweigh the instances we have, horrific as they are.
Well, I'm talking about even mass public shootings.
Right.
I'm talking about where police or prosecutors have said that if a permit holder wasn't there, some of these are incredibly dramatic cases that would have gotten massive international attention. You have cases like at a back-to-school event last year in Florida, not very far from Parkland, elementary school, hundreds of school children there. A man came in, started firing his gun. A vendor with a permitted concealed handgun seriously wounded the attacker and stopped him before he was able to go and actually hit anybody with his shots. If the vendor hadn't been there, God knows how much carnage that there would have been and how much massive international attention. As it was, the only news coverage that existed that was just in the local media market. But this has an impact in multiple ways. One is, I think if these cases got more news attention, it might discourage some people from doing the attacks.
Sure.
And secondly, it creates a real imbalance in people's minds about the costs and benefits of guns. If they only hear about the bad things and never hear about the benefits, then how can we expect most people not to come away with such a negative view on guns?
Here's my concern. You have an institution like the City Council or the City and County Council of San Francisco declaring an organization domestic terrorists. Thereby, it's reasonable to infer that the persons who belong to that organization obviously must be domestic terrorists. Well, then what's the enforcement that you do for people who are designated domestic terrorists?
Somebody
Well,
arrest
the
them.
enforcement is seizure, right? Because how can you allow domestic terrorists to have weapons? And this
How
isn't
can you allow domestic terrorists to walk around the streets?
correct. And we've seen, and people have a little bit of amnesia about this, we've seen post-Katrina, Mayor Ray Nagin in New Orleans do what? Order gun confiscation,
Right.
where police went door to door and took weapons away. So this is not far-fetched. This is not some enormous leap of, oh, you're being hysterical or you're exaggerating. We have proof of that sort of behavior and conduct. And if people don't think that's an assault on their Second Amendment rights, they need to rethink the situation.
Just
And
one fast thing. I would just say, it's not, to me, it's just not an assault on Second Amendment rights. The way I usually try to phrase it, it's an assault on their safety. The fact that you make it so that people can't defend themselves, it's a safety issue, not just a Second Amendment rights issue.